are these people?
We mentioned this professor in the last segment, right? Who is involved with the Colombia situation. So go check out our segment on the activists being persecuted there. So Alan Macleod writes, professor at Center of Columbia University, deportation scandal is former Israeli spy. So funny how that works, right? Alan's mentioned plenty of times that intelligence agencies infiltrate education. So, here he is doing it again. But he writes, Mahmoud Khalil, a recent graduate of the University School of International and Public Affairs, who abducted by immigration customs informant Saturday for his role in organizing protests last year against Israel's attack on Gaza. Khalil's dean, Dr. Karen Yahramilo, head of the School of International and Public Affairs, is a former Israeli military intelligence officer and official at Israel's mission to the United Nations. Yahramilo played a significant role in drumming up public concern about a supposed wave of intolerable anti-Semitism sweeping over the campus, thereby laying the groundwork for an extensive crackdown on civil liberties that has followed the protests. Before entering... yes, continue.
So, I mean, this might bring into that documentary into more question now, especially if she knew about it.
Yeah.
So that could be the connection there. But even that, the idea that he was doing a documentary, even in that,
yeah, there's some questions, for sure.
For sure.
So, Yahramilo served as an officer and intelligence analyst with the IDF, given that she was recruited into the intelligence services because of her ability to speak Arabic fluently. Her job likely entailed surveilling the Arab population. After leaving the world of intelligence, she worked for Israel's permanent mission to the United Nations in New York. While there, she met and married her husband, Israel's official United Nations spokesperson. Although she is now an academic, she has never left the world of international security, making the subject her area of expertise. She has made a point of trying to lift women's voices in the field. One of those was the then U.S. Director of National Security, Avril Haines, whom she spoke with in 2023. But even though Khalil was a student in her school, she had nothing to say about his arrest. Indeed, rather than speak out on the issue, as activists have demanded, she instead chose this week to invite Naftali Bennett, Prime Minister of Israel from 21 to 2022, to speak at Columbia. Students protesting Tuesday's event were condemned by university authorities for harassing Yahramilo. Columbia was the epicenter of a massive protest movement across university campuses nationwide last year. It is estimated that at least 8% of all American college students participated in demonstrations denouncing the genocidal attack on Gaza and calling on educational institutions to divest from Israel. The response was equally vast in its scale. Well over 3,000 protesters were arrested, including faculty members themselves. The nationwide movement began on Columbia on April 17th when a modest Gaza solidarity encampment was established. Protesters were shocked when University President Manoush Shafiq immediately called in the New York Police Department, the first time the university had allowed police to suppress dissent on campus since the famous 1968 demonstrations against the Vietnam War. Mahmoud Khalil was among the leaders of the movement. The Syrian-born Palestinian refugee was willing to speak calmly and cogently to the press about the protest goals. A permanent resident of the United States, he was abducted by ICE on Saturday. Quote, ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mahmoud Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come, President Trump stated. Secretary of State Marco Rubio echoed Trump's ominous threat, announcing we will be revoking the visas and or green cards of Hamas supporters in America so they can be deported. In another clear threat, the Trump admin moved to cancel $400 million in funding to Columbia University, citing the institution's failure to sufficiently crack down on anti-Semitic incidents on campus. So here's the White House. ICE proudly apprehended.
This was disgusting.
Yeah.
Disgusting.
Detained Mahmoud Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. Okay. yada yada. So, again, I've mentioned some spidey senses tingling over all this, right? Especially with Trump singling out this specific individual. So I found this from Free Palestine TV. They write, the case of Mahmoud Khalil is a perfect example of the limits of liberalism and collaboration with the Zionist empire in hopes of gaining some equity or change in the power structures. For those who don't know, Khalil is a Syrian citizen who collaborated with the imperialist plot against his homeland and worked for the UK embassy in Lebanon, coordinating destabilization programs. He also worked in the NGOs in the US designed to drive the Syrian diaspora youth astray from decolonization and into the arms of Wahhabi and Ikhwani collaborationist rule. So you see a lot of Palestinians especially have issues here, right? Al Jazeera specifically has got some issues too on this, right? About,
so it kind of reminds me of the documentary that we covered for the last couple of weeks, just the collaboration of Israeli and Palestinian, well, in that case, Palestinian and Israeli directors to put together this film, and like the Israeli director basically still very much liberal Zionist views, like, and kind of both sides the situation in terms of what's happening in the West Bank. So it seems like, given what you say here, like in this tweet, that he was kind of he's the go-between, and probably his views may be kind of muddled
for sure
in
especially with this serious stuff, because as we've talked previously, Israel actively, I think it was another Alan Macleod bit, might have been a Clareberg story where we talked about how they, made coffee shops and, went to the universities there and infiltrated members into their own ranks as far as Mossad is concerned and the CIA. So as for his role at Columbia University, he was a go-between agreed upon by the Zionist admin and the Palestinian liberation supporters, i.e., he was not a member of the movement and only a messenger. He was also against the Hind Hall movement and actions. So here's Mahmoud Khalil, apparently. So here is Mahmoud Khalil, a man who sold his country to the wolves for a few measly dollars, who acted as reasonable messenger of Zionist power to the Palestinians at Columbia, and all he got in return was to be disappeared by Zionist masters in the White House. Moral of the story here, as an Arab or Muslim, no matter how much you suck up to Zionists, they will never treat you as an equal human, and the more you suck up to them, the more they will humiliate you when you outlive your usefulness. We hope Mr. Khalil returns home safely to his family, but you should all know what you are supporting and do so in spite of his shortcomings before his disappearing, even though he is a tool, fool, or even agent, signals that all Arabs and Muslims in the USA could be treated even worse. So here he is as the project manager at UK Syria's office in Beirut, right? So works as the office.
So he's not. So I'm not sure if anyone in our space has talked about this, but so he has gone around. So he has a name
served at the Youth Advocacy Board of the Global Partnership for Education, a multi-stakeholder partnership. Mahmoud holds a BSc in computer science from the Lebanese American University and a diploma in leadership from Columbia University in New York, and is continuously looking for innovative solutions using technology to support the education of out-of-school children. So, again, not all bad.
So given but given what you're saying now, this documentary makes sense.
Yes,
it does make a lot of sense.
I also think part of it is that because he's connected with the university, there's this thing about the movement is kind of hinged upon like college liberals, just like Vietnam was, right? Where that seems to be the only focus is, white liberals in colleges making, doing the performance to make, to cause awareness, right? And this is another victim of that. And I think that they're definitely singling out the colleges, partially because of, anti-college and anti-education rhetoric from Republicans that have been there for years.
It's kill birds with one stone. They want to suppress it. He was very prominent. He has a name for himself. And given like now what we're seeing, I think his name probably would have, even if he wasn't abducted, his name probably would have gone a lot larger, in terms of this documentary. So I think that may have been kind of the thing of
even
being like, okay, we have to kind of cut this now before he gets too big.
So here's some more that I found. So this is from Sharpie Smear Guard. So I don't know this person necessarily, but they wrote this article that was underneath that post I just read. And it writes, Mahmoud Khalil's public elevation as a symbol of Palestinian resistance within American political media spheres reflects a sophisticated COINTELPRO-style operation rooted in Zionist and Western intelligence strategies of controlled opposition. His rise occurs within a historical framework where Palestinian solidarity movements have been systematically targeted, infiltrated, and redirected by Zionist-aligned forces seeking to neutralize authentic Palestinian resistance while preserving U.S. complicity in Israel's expansion and war crimes. Khalil's arrest, widely condemned as a violation of civil liberties, is not an independent event, but part of a calculated effort to create a managed figurehead whose influence remains tightly controlled within politically acceptable boundaries. His role reflects a long-standing Zionist strategy of pointing or elevating controlled opposition figures to absorb public outrage while steering movements away from direct political action or institutional change. This tactic mirrors historical infiltration operations targeting the American civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and black liberation struggles, where figures with controlled influence were installed to limit the scope and effectiveness of grassroots resistance. Khalil's position as a Columbia University student organizer placed him in proximity to influential Zionist-aligned institutions. The coordinating narrative surrounding his arrest, including the bipartisan response from Democratic and Republican lawmakers, reveals the strategic alignment between U.S. domestic policy and Zionist interests. His arrest serves multiple purposes, legitimizing a crackdown on Palestinian advocacy under the guise of anti-terrorism, reinforcing the narrative that anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism, and coordinating American political figures to maintain unwavering support for Israel. The bipartisan condemnation of Khalil's detention is notable for its selective outrage. While figures like Hakeem Jeffries frame the arrest as inconsistent with constitutional values, see other squad members' takes in our earlier segment, the deeper political aim is to create a safe channel for Palestinian advocacy that does not threaten U.S. foreign policy objectives or Israel's dominance. Khalil's manufactured prominence assures that any Palestinian resistance remains within controlled, politically sanctioned boundaries, neutralizing the potential for real structural change. Khalil is thus a carefully positioned figure whose public image as a victim of political repression serves to both pacify and control Palestinian solidarity movements. His arrest, strategically timed and exploited by both political parties, underscores the extent of Zionist influence over U.S. domestic and foreign policy. By elevating Khalil as a symbolic but ultimately controlled opposition figure, Zionist intelligence networks are reinforcing a historical pattern of using false representation to fragment and dilute authentic political resistance. I saw in comments underneath this that it felt like, they're beating the house slave to make the field slaves more afraid, right? Yes. That seems kind of what's happening.
That definitely feels like it. Yeah, it's like, it's the idea of making an example of him so that no one else would even come up to the level where he, and again, now that, and actually I do appreciate you kind of doing all of this, because it just, at least in the media, just makes it seem like he's just a random post-grad student that just happened to care. No. He had connections and he had privilege and he had a name for himself. So
and moral of the story, don't work with them because they're like, regardless of what you do, they don't care, you know?
Right.
So you could be the nice, squeaky clean and only work within the boundaries, right? Which is clearly what they wanted from this guy. But even that's going to get persecuted. So why did you even try to do
I wonder
that?
with this professor, I wonder this connection with this professor then, because going back to
and Shai Davidai and Beitar and all these agencies that are actively harassing pro-Palestinian students. You know, we just don't have a fancy word to call that harassment, like anti-Semitism, you know? So, but yeah, I mean, it's frustrating to say the least. But to continue Macleod's article, Khalil's 8-month pregnant wife was initially told that he had been taken to a faculty in Elizabeth, New Jersey. In fact, he had moved halfway across the country to a center in Jena, Louisiana. Journalist Pablo Mariquez of Migrant Insider explained that ICE often goes immigration judge shopping by putting detainees in detention centers under jurisdiction of courts that very rarely decide in favor of migrants. The very high-profile attempt to deport the holder of a green card because of political speech criticizing a foreign government has left many civil rights lawyers deeply worried. Alex Karakstanis, for example, stated that I've never seen a more clear-cut First Amendment violation or a more flagrant government declaration of intent to violate black-letter law. The government does not claim he committed a crime, just that he held views that the government doesn't like about Israel. Bone-chilling, he added. So...
And shout out to Sabi, because I know she mentioned this. This is why how the Israeli lobby managed to change the definition of anti-Semitism to include any criticism against Israel is dangerous for this reason. Because no matter how like tepid. You can just say, Israel sucks. And like we can call out this country all day long without any consequence, really. Like, but to call out a foreign nation, like, oh no, like you can't do that. So that in and itself is bogus, but they weaponize the idea of anything in relation to Israel that isn't positive can count as anti-Semitism, which, and again, I'm a naturalized citizen. Like I was on green card status for like, I think close to 20 years before I got my citizenship like 10 years ago. But that makes me worried. Like if they're able to do this to a green card holder, like they can really do this to anybody that they choose to. Like, and for me as a naturalized citizen, could they just, even on this show, if I call out Israel, could I have my passport revoked? Like, like all this stuff, and I told you this like offline, like over the last couple of days, is stuff that I've been thinking about. Like, what's the implications of this for everyone, not just for green card? I think like just having a green card, I think it's really the bug and not the feature per se, but but it does call into question like how our government might twist the Constitution to kind of fit their purposes on account of a foreign nation. That is scary to me.
Yeah, I agree. But Collin, foreign countries would never have influence over our government. How dare you? How dare you try to make that accusation? So much of Colombia's funding comes from donations from billionaire benefactors, but those gifts comes with strings attached. This becomes apparent in the wake of the protest movement as many pro-Israeli patrons demanded the university take action. Manufacturing magnate Robert Kraft, for example, publicly announced he was cutting his alma mater off from his lavish funding over its failure to effectively suppress the demonstrations. Hedge fund manager Leon Cooperman did the same, demanding that Colombia's crazy kids have to be controlled. These kids evidently also included 61-year-old Jordanian professor Joseph Massad, whose views on the Middle East Cooperman found intolerable and called for his firing. Soviet-born oligarch Len Blavatnik, meanwhile, urged police to hold the protesters to account. Between them, Kraft, Kuberman, and Blavatnik are believed to have donated nearly $100 million to Columbia, giving them considerable influence over the political direction of the university. There were also voices from within the university clamoring for the violent suppression of the student movement. Assistant Professor of Business Management Shai Davidai, for example, denounced the protesters as Nazis and terrorists and called for the National Guard to be set upon the encampment. I was about to say, because Kent State might have a word with you, obliquely referencing the Kent State University massacre while doing so. Davidai, an Israeli American, served in the IDF and has publicly expressed his pride in doing so. So, given its most recent addition, it appears unlikely that the School of International and Public Affairs will moderate its pro-Israeli positions. In January, the school announced that Jacob Liu would join the facility. Liu had just left the job as the U.S. ambassador to Israel under the Biden administration, a role in which he facilitated American complicity in genocide, supplying Israel with weapons, and providing it with diplomatic support for its efforts.
Give him hell, Columbia.
Longtime readers of MintPress News will be less surprised than many to hear that Israeli military intelligence officials hold such important positions in American life. Previous MintPress investigations that have uncovered giant networks of former Israeli spies working in top jobs in big tech and social media companies, including Microsoft, Google, Meta, and Amazon. Even TikTok, often labeled a Chinese spying app, has hired former Israeli spies to run its affairs. And in October, we revealed that former Israeli spooks are writing America's news, with multiple former agents working at top U.S. outlets, including CNN, Axios, and the New York Times. I do believe we covered all of those, so shout out to us for being longtime readers of MintPress News. Appreciate you, MintPress. But perhaps then, the fact that the dean of the very school at the center of worldwide media storm is a former Israeli military intelligence officer should not be such a shock, but it remains a stark reminder of the level of extraordinary institutional bias in favor of Israel displayed across the United States, and I will extend that just to capitalism. They're kind of into that. They love that shit. So, thus, imperialism coincides. Thoughts, Care Bear?
Correct. I mean, it's interesting that I knew you you told me there were connections to the previous segment, but I think both together kind of give a better picture of Mahmoud Khalil, just in terms of it just kind of that's kind of what the media is presenting him as, in kind of a similar way of Luigi, like almost a know-nothing that somehow shut out to prominence, when we know, and especially, and I think in my mind, we have to remember, if they're getting so much play in the press, there is usually a reason, and more nefarious one, that they're not going to tell you. And I think I have to do a better job of remembering that. Often there is a larger thing, unbeknownst to us, that the powers that be are calculating to, as you said, manufacture consent. Or in this case, to give sympathy to a figurehead, which would be easier to basically tear that person apart. That would essentially, it's just it just gives me the illusion of back in ancient Rome with gladiators. Make an example of the slaves in battle so that the rest of the people will not try anything to usurp power. So this is kind of what this reminds me of, is they happen to target a guy who was well-to-do, it seems, has a name for himself, actually has connections, and I can't speak to what was going on in his head in terms of what he thought, he was trying to do in terms of, I guess, collaborating with Zionists to, I guess, to appease them, to actually maybe see the error of his ways. But again, as
there's this
you'll probably
idea
have
of
to try,
decorum. We got to have decorum. We got to work with the other side. And fuck you.
Which goes back to my very first segment that I spoke to tonight. It's exactly the argument that I had in my union meeting today. It's the idea of like, and it's out of fear. It's like fear of what the other side is going to think of you, that you feel you have to go in politely and whatever, but they're not going to respect you because they're just going to kick in your face and do it anyway. So it's like,
ain't nobody got time for that.
So what's the balance in that? Yes, like obviously, and this is what I'm going to tell people, in terms of organizing / activism. Obviously, you need to have a plan, but civil disobedience in the right way should be a part of it. So if it were that you have to go up and kind of speak loudly and in power to politicians, like, don't necessarily have that be the one-off. That should be a part of other actions that might be happening in lieu of and in collaboration with other things that are happening. So this is why, I guess for many people, like, organizing is work, because there has to be multiple things happening, usually at the same time or in tandem with each other, so that if one thing fails, that you have other things kind of working behind the scenes that can lead to that change. Like, and that's why I feel like one-off rallies, I'm not a fan of. Like, screaming at politicians one time is not going to help matters. Like, there has to be several different things happening at different times over the span of, you can fill in the blank how long, in order to wear these people down. So I think it's not a matter of, screaming at them, or because they don't care. They, like, they'll just turn the other way and just like give you lift you the finger or whatever. But what has to be done consistently and in power, in collaboration, and even with that, just really trusting that the people that you're hanging around with are really the people that you should be hanging out with, because there are a lot of people who have other ulterior motives, often for the establishment, that you need to be wary of in these circles too. So, and I guess Khalil was trying to both sides it, and
didn't work out.
He lost for it, seemingly. So, like I said, we'll see how this goes down, but that doesn't take away what he was trying to do, whatever. That being said, but it is a matter of, Trump making an example of him to suppress everybody else in their protests against Israel.
Yep. I agree. And also just the Syria issue is kind of a litmus test for a lot of that. So, if you're not going to try to get that right, and that has to do with so many religious sect factioning that is still confusing to me. Shia, Sunni, Alawite, all that stuff. But I know some Palestinians fall on the other side of that issue because of that. So, like, I hope that you learn more in your, days, but until then, I have to be careful of you. But otherwise, good luck with all that. So, but yeah, definitely terrifying rights are being taken away. So luckily there's, no habeas corpus or anything like that to protect us now. So that's going to be fun. And talking about that kind of stuff is why we're demonetized. So you can go to ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork or scan that QR code on your screen if you would like to give us monetary donations outside of the YouTube system. We appreciate it. If not, money's tight. We get it. Best thing you can do is like and subscribe, hit the share button. you know, the only way people see this type of content is if you share it and leave a comment. Allegedly, that helps with the algorithm, and we would like to know what you think. We read those, so get down in those comments and let us know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.